Welcome back to the Single Dad's online podcast, Online Dad, and I am the Online Dad. Today's podcast is going to focus on parenting from two households, which often can be problematic, especially when it's a brand new divorce or a brand new single parent situation, and there's a lot of bitterness and anger and animosity going between you and your ex. But remember, when it comes to parenting, it's not about you. It's about the relationship you have with your children. And it's real important that when you're parenting from two different households, you still have each other's back in certain circumstances, and to make sure that the way you manage your household is similar to the way that you managed when you guys were together. And what that's going to do in the long run is going to create a better level of stability for the relationship between you and your children, as well as your children being able to continue to navigate not only the grief and loss of mom and dad not being together, but gives them the sense of security and knowing that no matter which household that they're in, the rules for the most part are the same. Most single dads who don't have full-time residency with their children tend to be a little bit more laxed in the rules because they want to have fun over the weekend, they want to laugh and joke, and they don't want any confrontation. So they tend to be a little bit more flexible in curfews and what they can see on TV and what they eat and where they go and what you buy them. And it creates a bigger problem for both households, because then when you take your kids back to your ex's house and she's got the rules and the boundaries and what needs to be done, tends to cause some problems, because what will happen is if there's a conflict between your ex-spouse and your kids regarding doing their chores or not doing their homework on time, then they're going to say, well, I'm going to go live with dad because he doesn't have any rules and he lets me do what I want and lets me go where I want and lets me, do my homework wherever. And then it starts becoming adversarial, and you'll say, well, great, that means my kids are moving in with me. Well, dads, I'm going to tell you right now, if your kids do move in with you because of the reason that you have no boundaries and rules, you're going to find out real quick you're going to need those boundaries and rules. And then once you put those rules and boundaries into place after you've spent a considerable amount of time not having them, you've just created a bigger problem for you to solve. Because then all of a sudden, they thought they're going to go to a place where they can come and go and they please and do what they want and stay as late as they want, and all of a sudden you're saying, oh, no, it's a school night, you need to go to bed at 11, tends to cause some problems. And more often than not, they probably will end up going back with your ex-wife at some point. So it's just real important that you make sure that there's consistency in everything you do. And even though you really don't want and you're mentally and emotionally drained to have to deal with conflict and confrontation, but that's also part about raising kids. So what I'm going to do is give you some suggestions regarding parenting from two households. And some of these you guys may already do together, which is great. But if you're not, or you're finding that there's some issues back and forth, maybe some of these suggestions might help you be more proactive in parenting in your own household, and that the two of you can realize that you can parent together even though you're living in two separate places. And one of the other things I'm going to hit on briefly towards the end of this podcast is the idea of parental nesting, or the term just nesting. So again, these are just suggestions. Every family dynamic is a little different, and if you need to modify this suggestion to fit in your family dynamic, great. The other thing I would suggest doing is try not to do all of these at once. Take down the list and go, oh God, I'm going to put all these in next time I see them. Start with one and navigate the one, whether you choose the most difficult one to start with or one that's a little bit easier and a no-brainer. Just take it one step at a time. I'm giving you several suggestions, and I don't expect you guys to do this all in one visit or over the course of a couple of months. It may take you a while, and as your kids get older, a lot of these rules you're going to have to modify as you get older, and a lot of these parental from two different households will have to modify as your kids get older. They get more independent, they get more abstract in their thinking, and sometimes this is just the rule, doesn't always work, and the two of you together hopefully can modify it so it works with both households. So again, these are suggestions. Modify them, use one, use all of them, use none of them. But again, they're just suggestions. So for most parents, when it's brand new out of the box and you got a brand new house or place to live that you call home, and your kids come over to visit you, you want to start new traditions or modify some of the older traditions that you had when you were married. and find that balance. You got to remember those traditions, those old traditions are great memories for your kids, and they're probably great memories for you. And there's no reason why you can't continue on those traditions or modify the tradition based on the circumstances of the house. Okay? It also helps your kids and helps you work through that grieving process because you're taking those traditions and you're modifying them so the kids still have some memories from the past and you're bringing them forward into the present. Avoid, if at all possible, selling the family home within the first 2 years. Now, the statement is easier said than done. Most times when the house is sold after divorce, it's for financial reasons because neither one parent can afford the house singly, or in order to divide up the assets amongst you, the house gets sold and it's divided up so each of you guys can go someplace that you want to live. But if at all possible, whether Dad, you end up living in the house or Mom ends up living in the house, if you can install that off for a couple of years, so it's one less thing that the kids have to cope with in addition to losing their parents' marriage. And it just buys you a little more time. And then when it is time to move, you've got that time to build it up as an exciting new change instead of several changes that have happened all at once. So chances are, if you're newly divorced and you had to have that separation and you were living in an apartment or a townhouse or someplace else, you may have already started doing this. Just make sure that wherever you end up calling home on a permanent level, that you continue with those traditions. Continue on those traditions. But if you can get away with not selling the family home or the marital home within the first 1 to 2 years, that would, it's kind of like that would be a perfect solution to buy some time while your kids are working through the new dynamic. If possible, both parents should live within your children's school district and boundaries. So what that basically means is if you can stay within the boundaries of your kid's school, makes the whole visitation thing a little more amiable and a little more palatable. If you have to drive 1 or 2 hours to come get your kids, to take them back home, if they forget something at school or there's a basketball game that they have to play in and you have to pick them up on a Friday night, and all of a sudden it's going to be 11 or 12 o'clock before you get home because the game's over at 8 or 9. So if you stay within that district, that also allows that when they do come visit you, that the friends that they already have can come over to your house and play with your kids, or go bike riding, or whatever it is they need to do. It makes it easier if there are sports tournaments or other things going on within their school that you're not having to drive distances back and forth. If it's a school project that one of your children's working on, but it's a group project, by living in that same district, then that group can come over to your home and work on there instead of saying, well, I can't do it this weekend because I got to go to my dad's. So if that's possible, that would be a great thing. Parenting from two households requires communication and cooperation. And I know dads might go, well, no, duh. But a lot of times, especially when the divorce is new, there's a lot of anger and bitterness between the both of you. And sometimes that communication doesn't always work. So you both need to figure out a way that you can put those differences aside to talk about your children. Because remember, this whole divorce going through is really nothing to do with your children. Has to do with your marriage. So you want to make sure that when it comes to your kids and what they need and what you need to do to be parents, remember, you have an ex-wife, but your kids don't have an ex-parent. You still have both parents. So they love you equally, and the last thing they want you need to do is be fighting over things. So you want to keep that communication level, and it's real important that your kids are not that bulletin board for you to communicate with your ex because you don't want to talk to her. If you need to talk to your ex-spouse, you need to call them, email them, text them, go to their place of business and talk to them. But do not make your kids bulletin boards. That's not their job. They're not messengers for you. It's one thing if it's a happy-go-lucky, oh, by the way, tell your mom I said happy birthday. That's a little different. But, in terms of make sure, your dad has what they need for you to study for your test, or make sure your dad knows about the baseball game tomorrow. You want to make sure that you have all that information. It's never your responsibility or the mom's responsibility to tell your children to tell them or you what needs to be done or the reminder. Okay? Goes with school communication as well. If you want to know their sports schedule, Don't depend on your kids to give it to you or your ex to give it to you. Get it on your own. So if it's through school, I'm sure it's on the website somewhere. If it's through the park district, I'm sure you can go to the park district website or make a phone call. It's also, dads, it's real important that whatever documentation the schools or the park district may need because it's a divorce situation and the parents are not living together, you have all that documentation that shows that you're entitled to get that information. A lot of times they'll be reluctant to do that because they don't know the circumstances behind the divorce and what was going on. So that's why they're going to need that information. It's not really an invasion of privacy, and it can be a little awkward or embarrassing to do, but you want to make sure that you're in the know. Don't wait for your ex to call you up and say, oh, by the way, I forgot the kids have a basketball tournament this weekend, and then all of a sudden you already agreed to go out of town on business because you didn't think anything was going on. So it's your responsibility to get that information and don't depend on anybody else. You got to remember when you were a kid, and whether your parents were together or they weren't together, how many times you go up to them last minute and go, oh, I forgot, I'm in the Christmas concert. Oh, I forgot, I got to do this. It happens. It's just the nature of the beast. Now with the internet being so accessible and being able to get this information, you should be able to go right to the website and get what you need. The other thing I want to talk about is this 50-50% visitation, where you get your kids 50% of the time and your ex gets your kids 50% of the time. And a lot of states now are working their child support based on the amount of time that they visit, where, again, it's something that works great on paper, but in practice it has a lot of issues. And a 50-50 split and your kids staying with you, I understand you're used to seeing your kids every day. I understand that you miss your children and you love them and you want to be able to see them and you're entitled to see them half the time. I don't disagree with you. But to expect to have it go back to the way it was when you're married is very unrealistic, especially if you end up living more than, a 30-minute to an hour drive from where your kids are at. It's just unrealistic. So during the school year, your ex is going to have a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Thursday, Friday, and the weekend, they're with you, or you rotate Sundays. It becomes very problematic. And children need to have a home plate, a place that they call home, that anchor. Because right now, that 50-50 split really has your kids living out of backpacks. And while you may say, well, they all have their own clothes at my house, and they have their own clothes at their mom's house, so they don't need a backpack. But they do. But they do, because there's certain things they need to bring with them, school books, their uniform for a game that they're having, and then they just don't know which end is up. And then if they want to go to their friend Sally's house for the weekend, but they can't because it's my dad's weekend or I'm at my dad's and you live an hour away, it's not always workable. Now, you live in the same school district, you live within a reasonable distance of the neighborhood, then maybe that might work, but it still has their kids your kids' heads on a swivel, that they're just going back and forth. They're not just anchored in one place. So, again, it's not for me to judge whether it works for your family or not. I'm just going to tell you that it's not always the best circumstance. It might be the best thing for you, but it may not be the best thing for your kids. So you want to look at that big picture and consider all of your options before you make that happen. When your kids are older and they're teenagers, many of them have part-time jobs, the boyfriends or girlfriends, and coming around, other functions going on, extracurricular activities, and it might be unrealistic for them to be with you that weekend because they've got to work or they've got a game or they got school projects, so they just want to stay at their mom's house because it's convenient. You can't really say no to that. No, it's my weekend and you're coming with me. Again, you got to go back to is what's in the best interest of your children, not what's in the best interest of you. I strongly recommend against cohabitating with your ex before, during, and after the divorce. It sends the wrong message to your kids. They always think that there's that chance of reconciliation because you both are still in the same house. Most adults, when they do this, it's because they can't afford to live someplace else. So dad or mom moves to the basement while dad or mom is in the master bedroom, and you live separate lives. Well, number one, it creates a lot of tension in the house to begin with. And then once you start dating, how does that look when you're both in the same house? Not to mention the person that you're dating and you're cohabitating in the same place as your ex is. It's not a real healthy environment. So you want to find a place, and I would say before you announce the divorce to your children and what's going to happen, or even the separation to your children, you need to figure out the living situation prior to that. So you've got to be careful living under the same roof, and sometimes there are no other circumstances because you just simply can't afford it. But again, what is the perception of your children? What are they thinking and feeling when this is going on? Because the tension is still there between you and your ex. You're still living in the same house. The other thing is you can't really move forward because you're still sitting in the same house the two of you guys created together. And that also makes it painful for you, and it also makes it painful for your ex because you can't put it to rest. It's always out there. So before you start the separation or the divorce proceedings or tell your kids what's going on, figure out how this is going to work with the living situation. Extracurricular activities with your kids, you need to communicate with your ex about the schedules, about the games, about everything that's there. While most divorce decrees will state that you are not obligated to take your children to these extracurricular games on your weekend. But tread lightly on that. The extracurricular activities are part of the culture of going to school. And it's important to them that they want to continue to participate in those sports. But if you say, well, I'm not going to take them, it's my weekend, I don't have to, and I'm exhausted and I don't want to be driving all over the place, that's not fair to your kids. So you want to be on the same page with your ex when it comes to these extracurricular activities. And as much as the society and the norm right now is to have your kids active in as many sports as possible and as many activities as possible, because you think it might make them a well-rounded kid, they might get really good at one of these sports, and that'll give them their ticket to college. I'm going to suggest, school is the priority, and then one activity might be able to push it to two, and that's it. Because you figure it this way, they're going to practice before school, they're going to practice after school, and if it's multiple sports or one sport's at school and the other sport is through the park district, their week is filled with practices, homework, and then you got the weekends for games and tournaments. Where's there time for you to have with your children? Where is there time for your children to have time with you? It's really not there. So I would suggest that you both get on the same page of, one, maybe two activities, but you figure school is the primary focus and then just one activity from there. And you've got to say to yourself, was it even worth when you're together with your spouse that the both of you are driving all over the place for multiple extracurricular activities? And if you have more than one child, it's got to be even doubly a problem for what family and communication is supposed to be about. You're eating on the fly, you're talking on the fly, you're doing things on the fly. You don't have just time to sit down and chat about it. So think about that. Rules and discipline really should be consistent between both households. As I said earlier in the opening of this podcast, that sometimes dads, we tend to lax the rules and the boundaries because we want our kids to have a good time and we don't want to spend it in conflict. We don't want to be arguing with our kids, so you just kind of let them do what they want. Or it could be the polar opposite, where you're the disciplinarian and you have the rules and the boundaries and your ex is a little more flexible. But it's important to keep the discipline. What was wrong and what were the rules when you guys were together really should be the same in two separate households. Consistency for your kids. And if that's not possible on your ex's end, where she's the one who's not a little more lackadaisical, or you feel you're entitled to that because you don't get your kids that often, you're really setting up the family dynamic and your kids up for failure. Because then what's going to happen is you're at home letting them do whatever they want, see whatever they want, go wherever they want, you buy them whatever they want, and then they go home to their mother who has the rules and the boundaries and bedtimes, and then there's some sort of argument that ensues because of it, and they say, well, I'm going to go live with Dad. He doesn't have any rules. He lets me do what he wants. He trusts me. So you say, great, my kid's moving in with me. But you're going to find out real quick that once they move in with you, you need to have rules. You need to have those rules. And then to try and impose those rules on them after you've spent a considerable amount of time of not imposing them, again, is going to cause problems. And more often than not, they'll end up going back with your ex. If you're religious, go to church. Take them to church. If you both go to the same church, or mom's taking them on Saturday, but you want to go with them on Sunday, then take them. There's no rule that I have found that you have to go to church only once a week. So if it's important for you guys to go to church as a family, then do it. Your kids may grumble and groan, and if you think it may be an unrealistic expectation to have them to go to church twice, once with mom, once with you, then maybe talk to your ex and say, can we rotate this to where every other Saturday you take them to church and then every other Sunday I take them to church? Try and find that middle ground so you can still experience that religious together, that religious experience together. And the other thing, too, is don't allow your guilt to parent your decisions. And that's in any of these things that we're discussing. A lot of times the guilt drives us to make decisions we normally wouldn't do. And I understand the guilt. I've lived the guilt. My parents had lived the guilt of feeling that we've upheaved their lives. What the least we can do is let them do this. Keep it all in perspective. And while there is some flexibility and leniency from time to time, but you do not want to let that guilt dominate all of your decisions. Co-parent peacefully if at all possible. Intense conflict between the parents has been shown to increase children's distress. Overt hostility, such as screaming or threatening one another, has been linked to behavior problems in children. Even minor tensions may also increase the child's distress. So you want to make sure that, number one, that everything has a conversation. If it gets heated between you and your kids, take a deep breath and cool off and just say, you know what, we're both angry right now. Let's just cool off. I'll find you in 15 minutes or a half hour. Or your child ends up storming off and locking themselves in the bedroom. Let them cool off and then go back in there. Now, if you and your ex are having high tension issues over whatever the circumstances are, and your kids know it, then again, that distress comes up there. If you have disagreements with your ex, it's real important you keep it between you and the ex, and you guys have to solve it together somehow. And if it doesn't get solved, then it becomes the lesser of two evils. Do I want to be right, or do I want to be happy? Do I want to run the risk that it's going to stress out my children, or do I just buck up and suck up and deal with it right now, and hopefully somewhere along the line a new solution will present itself? A classic example is when my son moved in with me full-time. I think it was his freshman or sophomore year in high school. He moved in with me probably August or September. And then his mom had moved about 6 hours away from where we were currently living. And then the holidays came around, and there was just an expectation, because he was with me full-time, that he was just going to go up there and spend the entire holidays. And I had a problem with that. And, in my head, I'm going, it's not my fault you moved 6 hours away. It's not my son's fault you moved 6 hours away. But from her perspective, this is where it was at. Now, fortunately, he was old enough at the time that I could give him the choice of what he wanted to do. And I just made him the promise for Christmas. I said, look, if you want to be with your mom, then go be with your mom. And then I'll leave the tree up until we can celebrate Christmas. Now, that's killing me inside, because I want to spend that holiday with my son. But at the same time, this is not his argument, his fight. I don't want him to have to choose. And while some of you may say, well, you made him choose. But I wanted to give him that out, that if he's going to go to his mom's, that he didn't need to feel guilty that he was leaving me on the holidays. So I just put on my best game face and did what I had to do to make it work. And I just left the tree up until he got home, and then we celebrated Christmas. Or we might have celebrated Christmas early before he left. So you've got to find that middle ground. Now, like I said, I gave that decision to him. With younger kids, again, it's the same thing. You don't want to give them that decision, because they don't want to have to, you don't want to have to make that decision and force the issue that they have to be with you. Again, do you want to be right or be happy? Can you find that middle ground? Is it something that you can rotate the holidays? So maybe Christmas Day one year you get your kids, and Christmas Day the next year your ex gets the kids, and maybe you use Christmas Eve or the day after Christmas to celebrate with your children. So while the day is important, and I get it, sometimes, the bigger picture is, well, let's do it Christmas Eve or the day after Christmas. You're still spending time with them. Same thing with Thanksgiving or any other holidays that are out there. As I said before, you do not want to use your children as message boards, especially if you're going to talk negatively about your ex. Don't ever, ever do that. You need to communicate with your ex. You make the time to communicate with them through whatever channel you have available. Communication should always take place between the adults. Okay, pick your method and how you want to do it, but the communication stays between your adults. It's okay to check in with your children even if they're with your ex. So if you want to make a quick call, a quick text, a quick email, say, hey, I was thinking about you, I love you guys, can't wait to see you next weekend. It's okay to do that. And same thing with your ex. It's okay for your ex to send a periodic text, email, saying the same thing, hey, thinking about you, love you, I'll see you guys when you get home. It's just that reassurance. Or if your kids want to talk to your ex while they're with you, make that happen. It's not that they love your ex more than they love you. It's their way of making sure that everybody's where they need to be. Got to keep in mind, when you get divorced, if mom and dad get divorced and dad leaves and moves someplace else, what's going to keep mom from leaving? Or vice versa. So sometimes they need that extra reassurance that they know that dad's out there or mom's out there. Now, if you're, if you're doing something special for the day, you got something planned, then tell your ex, say, hey, look, I got something special planned for the kids. Is it possible you can call them after 10 o'clock or call them before we leave at 5 o'clock? Because I just really want them just to kind of take this all in without having to, wanting to take a call. And that's a reasonable request. And the same thing goes with you. Hey, I got something planned with the kids. If you're going to call them, great, but can you do it before or after a certain time? Or not call that night and just call tomorrow. It's not an unreasonable request. Coordinate your birthdays, holidays, landmark functions like graduations, if at all possible. The last thing you want to do is make those landmark things adversarial. And you want to, again, it's not about you, it's about the relationship you have with your kids. So you want to try and coordinate with that. And if it's not possible, that's fine. But you want to try and coordinate that. So when you go to graduation together, or a first communion together, or some sort of an awards ceremony together, or a sporting event together to see your kids in their sports, in the perfect world scenario, you want to be able to be there to support your child together. Okay? And ideally, that would be great, and more often than not, you're on one side of the stadium and you're on the other side of the stadium. But even with that, you want to put those differences aside. If you're used to going to all the games and it's just plain adversarial, then work it out with your ex which games you're going to go to versus which games she's going to go to. But find that middle ground, okay? You coordinate that. Birthday parties, graduation parties, first communion parties. And it would be ideal if you could put your differences aside and be at the one party together. And if it's not possible, it's okay to have a second celebration, but you might have to modify it. But you want to try and work those out together so when those day comes, you know exactly what to expect and what's going to happen. And then your kids know what to expect and what to happen and what's going to happen. Remember, you are in control of what you're going to do, not what your ex is going to do. So unless your ex or your children are in danger or hurting themselves or other, you need to let them go. Whether you agree with it or not, whatever they're doing, you can't control it. Same thing on your end. She may not like the fact that you do something with your kids, but if you're not hurting yourself and you're not hurting them or other people doing it, there's really nothing she can do about it. So pick and choose those battles, and as long as your kids are not in danger and they're safe, then you just have to let it go, whether you agree with it or not. The last thing I want to talk about is parental nesting, or sometimes just called nesting. And the concept behind that is that you keep the marital house and you guys take turns living there. So your time frame, 3 months, 6 months, a year, you spend in the house while your ex then maintains an apartment. And then the idea is the kids are in the same school, the same neighborhood, they're sleeping in the same beds in the bedrooms that they've always had, to minimize the stress levels through all the changes when you get divorced. It keeps your children from uprooting them. It gives them more time to adjust to the new dynamic, knowing that they're going to be sleeping in the same house, and at least one of their parents will be in that same house as well. But there's downsides to nesting. I will say that if you and your ex live relatively close, the nesting thing might work. But I'm going to say that the downsides of this may end up causing bigger problems down the road in the long run. It might be a short-term solution, but I don't see it as a long-term solution. First of all, it's very expensive to maintain. You're maintaining a household, and then you're maintaining an apartment, and you might say, well, we'd be doing that anyways. Somebody would be living in the house, and the other would be living in an apartment or a condo or have another house. But when you're living in the house, who's on for all those bills? So if the furnace goes out while you're living there, is it your financial responsibility to pay to have that furnace replaced? Or is that being split between you and your ex? Same thing if your ex is living in there and the roof needs to be replaced or the air conditioning needs to be replaced. Is she on for the full cost of that because she was living there at the time? Or are you splitting that? This is where it becomes expensive. The property tax bill. Are you splitting that in addition to living in an apartment? So you need a new furnace at the tune of $3,200 and you're paying your rent and all the stuff that goes with paying rent in an apartment. It gets expensive to do that. So you got to kind of keep that in mind, that in the long run, it may be too expensive. It's not a long-term solution because when you start dating or you get remarried, does that mean that you and your new spouse are going to be sleeping in that same bed that your ex and her spouse are going to be sleeping in 6 months from now? And then what message is that sending to your kids? So I'm not sure that works. I don't work because the next bullet point is that it's sending your children the wrong message, that there may be a false hope of reconciliation. Because even though the two of you may not be sharing the bed together, but you're still sleeping in the same bed. So, and then you bring in a new wife to that situation. I'm not completely convinced that a new wife or a new spouse would be up for that anyway. But even if that happens, then there's a little bit of betrayal on the kids that somebody different is sleeping in that bed besides their mom. So I don't think it really works in the long run. There's that false hope of reconciliation because as long as you stay in that marital house and you seem amicable in how it's working, it says that at some point they might work their problems out. And it never really severs the past from the present. So while, again, a short-term solution may work, but you never really end that part of your married life together with your kids because it's still always there. And it's kind of hard, like at Christmas time, are you going to your apartment? Or are you going to your parents' house? So it creates just a sense of false hope of reconciliation in the long run, and it doesn't sever that past to the present. You can't really create new traditions if you're still staying in the same house. You would say, well, yeah, we do create new traditions because, my ex is not there. But it's probably the same Christmas tree you put up with the same ornaments that you guys did together. So there's a lot of gray areas in there that really could set up a very difficult to try and separate the past and try and move forward to the present. The last thing I want to mention as part of parenting from two households is with regards to child support. The child support is for your children. It's not for your ex. So you need to pay it. And most now do it through, a payroll deduction. So it just comes out of your payroll every month or every 2 weeks. But you need to pay it. And if you think that your ex is misspending the money or not, and your kids are living in squalor, that's a whole different issue. But child support is not a bargaining chip to be with your kids or to see your kids more often. And the way some states with paying child support based on visitation have kind of turned it into a bargaining chip. I want 50% of the time so I don't have to pay as much. But it's about supporting your children. I will also say the good thing practice with parenting from two households is you keep a spiral notebook. That spiral notebook is simply for you to document everything you do with your children, every phone call you make to them, every text message you make to them, everything you bought them, you have a receipt, you put it in that notebook. There's a confrontation that happens between your ex and you regarding it. It gets documented. So you have a full record of what's happened. And I even put a calendar in there or a calendar with it and mark the times that your kids were with you and how long they were with you. That way, if there's any discrepancy in a he said, she said with regards to child support, visitation, whatever, you've got a record of everything that you've done, everything that you spent. Okay, taking them back and forth to school, the different activities. It's like a journal. My hope is that you get through your children's whole life, they become adults, and you never once had to go back to any of those spiral notebooks and look back on it for any reason. But it's there just in case. I do understand that there is some spite and some animosity sometimes between exes, again, depending on the circumstances why the marriage ended in the first place. So you want to make sure you have all your ducks in a row. So if you have to go back to court or you're being accused of something that didn't happen, you've got a record and journal, you've got receipts, you've got everything. Most everything now is available online, so you can print out your cell phone records or your telephone records, credit card statements, everything that you've done, text messages. You can save the text in a file on your phone. You can print out a copy of that text and put it in that binder. There are tons of ways to keep that, but you want to keep it. It's for your own protection and for possibly the protection of the relationship of your kids. It's not something to show your kids. It's not something that you have to show with your kids, but it's something for you to keep as a record just in case. So that's all I've got for you today. Just remember, you are an awesome dad. Your kids do love you unconditionally, even though there might be some times where you don't feel that way, but they do love you unconditionally. So until the next podcast, I want to wish you a great rest of the week. And if you have any questions or comments or suggestions for future podcasts, by all means, go to my website, www.singledadsonline.org. And send me an email of what you'd like to hear or comments or criticisms about the podcast. So have a great rest of the day.